everybody, and welcome to the Harry Potter Trading Card Game Revival Podcast. My name is Sammy,
I'm Reese.
And I'm Huamin.
and today we are going to be talking about Heir of Slytherin and everything that kind of comes along with Heir of Slytherin as designers, as a revival team, and kind of what that whole process looked like. Two of us were actually on the design team for HOS back in the day, and the third joined after the fact. So this is going to be an interesting, reflective conversation, give you guys some insights into what our process was like, where our heads were at, and then one of the current designers who wasn't on the team back then will be able to ask us questions and hopefully give some good insight there as well. So we want to talk briefly just kind of about like the ideas behind HOS and why we chose HOS in the way that we did.
Which was totally a deliberate thing and not just like a hodgepodge mess as we gathered like, I don't know how many random people and threw them into a pot and saw what sticked.
Yeah, we initially had like, I think probably 10 people on the design team, and that was quite an interesting group. We tried a couple of different things, and just kind of through attrition, we ended up with the design team that we ended up with. And so HOS kind of feels, I think, a little bit more like a splattering of stuff, probably because it was our first set. The design team was so in flux at that point that it just feels very different than the other sets do.
Yeah, and I think another thing is that we didn't really have a conversation about what kind of theming and mechanics we wanted in HOS. Mostly our design structure and philosophy for HOS was like, okay, what story topics do we need to hit in Chamber of Secrets that were not already hit in the original '05 set? And let's make cards of them.
Probably a big thing from external point of view is obviously you're starting off first design set from the revival team. You got to think about how the game plays, how design works, getting all the new people on board. You said like hitting the story beats is the important part, but what are the other things you're considering around the actual game design at that point?
That's a really great question.
Yeah,
I think that we were trying to pick up where the original five were leaving off, and we had probably a bit of like imposter syndrome. And so we were just like, let's just wrap up the second book. That way we're kind of tying it as closely as we could design wise to the original sets, and then start the third book with our own flavor, our own insights, our own design philosophies. But HOS felt like we wanted to kind of just finish up what was already there and not do anything too crazy, which I think kind of shows in the power level of the set and just kind of the cards as a whole.
So like the cards were really designed to hit the story beats and then mechanically probably reflect the card's theme or the character as a mechanical piece. Then, yeah, it wasn't like here's a theme we want overall and let's stick to that and build a few cards around it.
Yeah, that didn't exist back then.
No, no, it could not. And I think it was also very difficult for us too, because this was also kind of the set where we had to prove to people like, hey, we could design a 75 card set based on 300 some odd cards that already exist, or 400, whatever, from the original guys 20 years previously. And so like that also, I think, just kind of, at least for me, restricted how powerful I was willing to let some cards be, and just kind of made me want to be a little more timid with some of the designs and kind of how exploratory we were willing to be.
So how did you guys go around the balance of the colors? Obviously, you were aiming for the story beats, but then you wanted to get the same amount of potions as you did Transfiguration, for example. How did that go?
I actually don't think I was as concerned about that in HOS.
You probably were.
Yeah, man. If you go back to our like POA, EOTP conversations, I was all about like, oh my God, Potions has like 2 less cards than Transfig. Why does Transfig have so many cards? But I think I wasn't actually. I actually don't know. Does HOS have the same number of cards in it as like in all of the colors?
That's
I'm
a
going
good
to
point. I didn't actually
assume it
check
did.
that.
Yeah, I think it does. I'm assuming that back then you were probably as on top of it as you are now. So I would assume so, but maybe not.
Yeah, it looks pretty similar just looking at the master sheet for that. All the colors look about the same.
We knew we wanted to have like one match in it. We wanted to have probably like a location in every color. These are kind of baseline things that I think we do in a lot of sets. We try to distribute the number of like locations evenly. We try to distribute the number of other card types evenly. We usually try to have one match per set just to kind of continue to boost that deck play style as well. So those were kind of just like things that we tried to incorporate everywhere, not just for HOS or just for future sets.
So going through it, trying to find your feet, and I know from the design of the later sets where we do sort of talk about the overall direction of the set, we go through some iterations there. What were the biggest changes or the most commonly changed card from HOS?
Oh no.
Yeah, I think the one that stands out to me is Chamber of Secrets. I think that card. I
It
think
went
I
through a
actually
decent number of changes.
Yeah, it was something like 50 different effects on there. It was the first document that got like really, really big. And because, oh my God, I was like looking back through the HOS design documents and they're actually kind of unreadable. Like the way that
Yeah,
we formatted like the power cost and like the card type were disassociated with the effect. And that all of that was disassociated with like the comments on each of the cards. And it was looking back, it's a mess.
yeah, it
I
was quite a
can't.
thing.
From the second team, then we pay homage to you guys who have done the legwork fixing that for us because it's pretty easy now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's much nicer. All that shout outs go to Sammy, who I think did you make the first original design thing? I know
Ye-
you definitely made the Google Sheets afterwards that like
Yeah,
actually works.
because of my lack of coding background and just understanding of how like Google Sheets worked 5 years ago, we did use this mess of a system. And then we got to the Google Sheets and everything was much better and it made so much more sense. But that was a rough 9 months, I think it took to design HOS because we started designing it in September, I want to say, of 2019. And then COVID actually hit halfway through the design. And then we ended up releasing it in that summer, I think, Harry's birthday, maybe, or something like that. But yeah, the initial documents were just a mess. But I think this is also for those who haven't heard or talked to us before about how we do the designs. Real brief synopsis is we essentially have all 75, 90, whatever it is, card names. And then every week we assign like 10 to 15 to work on. And then people have a remote time for that week or two to design card effect, put different ideas on the sheet per card. And then we meet on voice chat to talk about what effects we want to go with, what we want the card to do, look like, and whatnot. And then we end up approving one or two of them. And then we go into playtesting after a couple of months when the set is more complete. So we kind of just spatter ideas at each other on a sheet and then talk about it on voice, just so you guys understand how we do design.
Yeah, and that has worked pretty well for the past 5-ish years, I'd say.
Yeah.
To varying
Yeah,
degrees of effectiveness.
yeah, definitely coming in afterwards, it works very well now as opposed to what it sounds like for the first one.
Yeah. Well, and going back to Chamber of Secrets, like some of the old effects were like whenever somebody plays a card, they take 5 damage. All cards with a certain printed power cost more to play. Random other stuff like cards cannot be chosen, other things like that. And then we landed on it being essentially like a discard pile lock card. So it's gone through many iterations and various types of effects until we landed on that final one.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of iteration there, maybe a bit
Yeah.
more general spitballing, but I think in the end it sort of looks like it landed on a mechanical effect that reflects the feel of the card itself. Was that true for many of the cards?
That was probably one of like the biggest driving forces of the design back then, and probably also like even now I want to say that we do, or at least for me, I think that flavor is one of the reasons why people played HBTCG and one of the reasons why they still play HBTCG. So like I'm always trying to be cognizant
Agreed.
of what does a card represent and how can that be represented in like the mechanical effects of the card itself.
Do you have a particular card that you're sorry the effect got changed, you really wanted to see come through in that first set?
I mean, I think for me, like if I could go back and we could just errata some of the cards, I don't know if there's specific effects that I wish had been made, but there's definitely some cards that I would change the effect on just to make the power level where it needs to be. For example, dip it triggers at end of turn, and that's because of me. And I was arguing for it to trigger at end of turn. And I wish it had just triggered when you played the card, not at the end of turn. And I think his power level would have been a little better than what it is. So I think there's more cards for me that I just wish had been the timing had been slightly different or something like that, as opposed to like a previous effect.
For me, I honestly can't. It's been so long. It's been 5 years, man.
It has been a long
I
time.
can't actually like think of any cards that like, oh, this was the effect that I really wanted, and then it kind of died and changed into something else.
Yeah.
But
I will say Baby Acromantula was a card that we had a lot of conversation about, and there were two large effects before we landed on the current one, which fetches a baby when you play a baby. And essentially, the two big effects I remember is one was a token generation effect, and there was a lot of argument about whether tokens should exist in the game. And then I had initially advocated for an effect that was essentially like you can have as many Baby Acromantulas as you want in your deck, and they're just a bunch of one-ones. And I really loved that effect because I love the idea of just like swarming with spiders, but it wasn't seen as a super favorable effect. And so we ended up changing it. And I think the current effect is very, very good. But I do wish that we had gotten that onto a card. And I have tried that on other cards since, and it is always shot down. So that is one that I will keep pushing for.
and I'll keep trying to shoot it down, I guess.
Probably.
I
We
mean, there's
can
the second team now where it might not get shut down. Tokens is a design space. I don't know how it would feel in Harry Potter, being, you know, traditionally it's never had anything token like, but maybe there are other ways you can do token like effects.
That's one of the reasons why, like, I think we shied away from token creation because it kind of didn't feel very HPTCG-ish.
Yeah, very un-Harry Potter.
Yeah, Baby Acromantula used to be token generation. Aragog used to be token generation. Everyone's
Mhm.
favorite card, Eat Slugs, used to also be token generation.
Yep.
And then
How was that generation? Because obviously that's not even close to what it does now.
yeah, it used to be create a 1/1 draw card for I think 3 costs. It was literally just Slinking Ferret in Charms, which was really
Yeah.
good because like
Yeah, okay.
when Charms can get random creatures out, especially like aggressively costed creatures, that's pretty good. And then
Yeah.
we went through the whole phase of like we need to get rid of all the token creation. It's not actually working out, and Eat Slug became what it is today, which is to say the best card in HOS, bar none.
Potentially is as powerful as Slinking Ferrets. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I think one thing about the token generation, and I had argued against it, was mainly because with Harry Potter, your deck has a certain number of cards that can be in it, and it's never going to go above that 60 count. And a lot of what we've tried to do with the ban list recently, as well as some other cards, is make stuff a 1-for-1 trade-off. And tokens get into a realm where you eventually have more things on board than you have cards able to deal with those things, unless you have like a mass removal. And that wasn't there just wasn't enough mass removal at the time to make that something that would be okay to do. And so that was one thing that made tokens just difficult within this game from a design perspective.
Yeah, definitely for that initial set where you guys are still trying to find your feet. You're just like, that's too big of a hill to climb right now. Let's pigeonhole it, sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at the Baby Acromantula sheet, and it's editor name Sammy effect. Create
Okay,
two
let's
1/1 Aragog's children's spider creature tokens.
Yeah, so after that effect, and we talked about it more, and we test played. This is why test playing is very important. I was just like, this cannot happen. So the test playing, and we do test playing usually for 1 to 2 months, sometimes longer if somebody gets really ambitious. That showed that I was like, I don't want to do this. I regret my ideas, and I just want to pretend they don't exist.
And that's what that
Yeah.
first set's for, right? It's the testing and growth and what can and can't
Yes.
work, and you get used
Yeah.
to a few more things.
And another card I want to talk about too with Millicent Bulstrode.
Oh, God.
She's very underwhelming, and that's also because of me. Essentially, in this set, if a card is underpowered, it's probably my fault. And I just argued against them being more powerful, trying to future-proof stuff. And so Millicent should have been like 1 action to do 2 damage to a creature, and then I think she probably would see some kind of like sideboard play or something maybe, or a 3 damage to a creature. I don't know. But underwhelming
That
card,
seems-
wish she had been a little buff too.
I feel like that seems pretty strong. A repeated like 2 damage to a creature kind of just shuts down a lot of creature decks. Repeated 1 damage
Yeah.
to a creature is just useless though, which is why
Right.
I think Polyakov is where he is right now in
Yeah.
GOF, where he's not even in action and he kind of just deals 1 damage to everything that comes in, which I think is
Yes.
like a much better spot than Millicent is.
Yeah. It's sad though, because he doesn't have the same keywords that she has. So like I wish his effect had been her effect, and then the keywords would have just helped decks much better, and it just would have all worked, I think, better. But I'm happy with where we ended up with him, despite Millicent getting the short end of the stick.
Let's be real here. Who's a Millicent fan?
True. Very true.
Also, the reason why she has once per turn on that is like we were trying to find more things that you could do with Mandrake's Draft. But I don't know if you want to spend 6 potions and a card card and 2 actions to deal 2 damage to a creature on your turn. That seems not good.
Yeah, kind of a miss there, but maybe we'll make better cards that Mandrake Draft can hit in the
Yeah.
future.
I mean, it was mostly just an Arthur card at the time of release, but like I
Yeah.
think as I talked about before, like Rita and Lupin are pretty good targets for it now. So, and it's only going to
Oh, yeah.
see more targets in the future.
Yes.
Yeah, so obviously we've talked about like Eat Slugs and Millicent Bulstrode. Some of the cards you guys probably feel are more obvious misses. What are the ones you sort of are happy with the power level that came out? I think one that comes to my mind, and I've played in tournaments before, is Cornish Pixies.
I think that like one of the biggest wins of HOS is Cornish Pixie. It gives a lot of a level of interaction that creatures were lacking before. It's also not actually that aggressively statted. Like 1/1 is probably like the least threatening thing that you can do. But the fact that it takes a card from your opponent's hand, the amount of disruption that it adds is great.
And I think one thing that we've heard some feedback from are cards we design that force your opponent to answer them or force more interaction with your opponent. Cornish Pixie being one example, and then Wanted Poster from a future set being another example, where it's not just I do this thing and then you do your thing back. It's I'm doing this thing that's disrupting you and you need to answer it to continue your game plan. And I think Cornish Pixie kind of just hits that super well. And that's why it's such a great card. Probably one of the best creatures we've designed. Not the best, but probably up there. And I do want to say I'm looking at the Cornish Pixie sheet. And my first idea for Cornish Pixie was you can fetch more Cornish Pixies from your deck, and then you can have any number of Cornish Pixies you want to. So I really tried to get that, have any number you want on multiple cards, and it just did not happen. So we'll see.
My gosh.
We'll
I
see.
mean, the flavors there for the Cornish Pixies,
Yeah.
and for
yeah.
the spiders. Understandable.
100%.
So are there any other ones that you guys were really happy with?
I really like where Lucius's Cane ended up. I think this is
Yes.
like a pretty slept on card, especially I think after POA release, there was quite a lot of decks that were running like Lucius's Cane into Gringotts and Egyptian Holiday. And that kind of like control your opponent with like action count. But I just think that in any like Draco Malfoy Slytherin deck, it's also kind of just a card that you can just throw in, and then it becomes just a free 2 damage ping at the end of your turn, like almost every turn, because you're going to be activating Draco so many times.
Yeah, and it was the first card that we did that I don't think color bending is the correct term for, but we included a color that is not the color of the card in the text box because it's a potions card that provides a charm's power. And that kind of laid some of the foundation for future stuff that we would do with Full Moon and some Goblet of Fire cards and whatnot. So this was kind of a little bit of being adventurous that is kind of counterintuitive to the really reserved nature for a lot of the rest of the set. And I like that it does have that additional kind of twist to it.
Yeah, and I think, is it Frizz that's always saying we're going to get to all
Yes.
iterations of all 20, is it? Yeah, 5 times 4.
Yeah.
All 20 iterations of be in one set, be in one color, provide another color.
Yeah, at some point
So
we
look
will.
forward to that.
Yeah, I'm super excited for when we complete that cycle. But there may be quite a few sets from now, so we'll have to see. But two other cards that I like a lot were Drawing the Sword and Basilisk Fang. Drawing the Sword actually started, if I remember correctly, as Godric Gryffindor Sword. So it was not a spell. And we were discussing about future design stuff we wanted to do with a sword and all of that kind of stuff. So we ended up changing it from the Sword of Gryffindor into Drawing the Sword and making it a spell. So like the artwork for that card as well, shout out to the artist, actually is an entire sword laying on a bench or a table or something, not just like the hilt. So there's more to that too. And maybe we'll send some art out into the groups at some point in the future to see like the full art that isn't in all of the cards. But I think Drawing the Sword is a very powerful and very good removal piece for creatures if you're playing Gryffindors.
That's an interesting point as well. You're talking about originally it was Gryffindor's sword, but you guys were at that point even considering future sets.
Considering is a good word. It's a very neutral word that doesn't promise much about the future. But we're considering it.
Yeah, we said we know we're going to go here eventually, and do we want to not waste, but kind of use up this potential card name for this thing, or do we want to hold that for a future card? So no plans as to what that's going to do in book 7, but we know we wanted to do something.
I thought there was like talk about trying to do like the founders relics. I don't know if relics is like the right term, but I'm going to use relics here. The founders like relics in
Yeah,
some sort of mini
artifacts.
set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like Hogwarts, a History had like the founding members of Hogwarts. I thought we were talking about something like that, but I don't know. That was a long time ago. We haven't brought that up since.
Yeah, was a very long time ago.
Yeah.
But I do also really like Basilisk Fang, the
Yes.
duality of like being able to come in and do two things upon entering, both damage to your creature and then damage to your opponent, so it's never a useless card. And then also being a decent beater for something like Arthur, and then also being able to discard it for another effect is, I think overall, like we hit so many good things with that card in terms of the power of the card, the printed power of the card, as well as the power of it, and then the flexibility of the effects. Like I think it's a very good card and an underutilized card as well.
It
Yeah.
becomes a very strong control piece with brass scales that would come out in PoA, where you can just keep repeating this over and over, and like your opponent's board sometimes just doesn't really exist after a few turns.
And it's moving into more of a design space now, which we are exploring, of having something that you can invest actions into rather than having it to play cards where
Yeah.
you must be drawing things to be able to do anything at all. Now you've got something permanent on board that you can switch your attention
Semi-permanent.
to instead. Yeah. Semi-permanent. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the original designers really missed on was the power level of cards that require an action to use. And I'm always cognizant about that with the cost of an action is like very, very high. And when you put an action cost on a card that you have to play and then a card that you have to activate later, that is such a large action investment and such a large loss of tempo to get that first use off that I think that the power level of things that do require that level of action investment needs to be proportional. Like the reward has to be there. And I do think that Basilisk Fang is one of the cards that does hit that.
Yeah, I think we've looked at this now, as far as competitive play goes, about really an action standpoint into the game, because that is the limiting factor. I mean, once you have power, you can play anything below that power or equal to it, but pretty consistently games are won in competitive settings in a given amount of action. So it's very, very correct saying that actions are a very, very costly aspect.
So one other thing that happened with this set too is we were kind of trying to formalize and introduce wording things that made sense within the game itself. One thing that we constantly talk about, and with a tournament happening right now, I've had people message me about wording and how they interact with other cards. The original wording in the game is not fantastic. There is just ambiguity, there's some conflicting wording, and we often just kind of get a headache on the design team when we are trying to do stuff and design cards. So some of the changes that we started with this set and we've tried to carry through with the other sets are things like getting rid of pronouns and just using they, them, their, just to reduce text space, number one, and then also not have to like refer to he, she, because it just becomes a headache, and the whole verbiage there is just, it gets a lot. We also tried to introduce stuff like play as if it were in your
Oh,
hand, if
God.
you do, which has become a bit of a headache within itself for various reasons.
Yeah, we're like, or I'm of the opinion that I'm not even sure if we need to have it anymore because HOS was the first time we had the ability to like play something outside of your hand in a manner of using an action to play it because, putting into play and playing are the same thing in HPTCG, which makes me
Yeah,
really
so for
unhappy.
everyone listening, that's a big distinction that we talk about a lot, is playing a card and putting a card into play are different but the same. But
If you've never seen the Hermione Granger Remembrall ruling, you should look it up because that ruling is the thing that makes me want to go over to WotC and just, it was probably like an intern or something that was answering questions. And now we're stuck with it. Like, oh my gosh, I am so mad at that.
Oh, so what he's referring to is that back before technology was what it is today and the internet was what it is, there was just a chat room that you could go and sit in like once a month or something like that, and there would be Professor somebody, I forgot what their name actually was, And it seemed to be just a random WotC employee who would sit in this chat room and people would ask them questions about the game. And this random employee would just answer stuff. And that ended up becoming what was used as official rulings on a lot of the cards. Not really the best way to have a nice formalized ruling system for cards, but that is what we have to go on when we're working with a lot of card wordings, a lot of rulings, and stuff like that. So if you see weird interactions or stuff that just seems strange, or Dumbledore's Watch or the Hermione Remember All one, it's because of this random employee that was just answering questions in this random chat room.
Right, because that could have been one week Bob, and then the next week it was Fred, and he's got a completely different opinion on a slightly different card, even though it should work the same as the previous week's one. Now doesn't, because they don't like that or haven't thought of it in the same way or a consistent manner.
Yeah,
exactly.
If you're like the person that was actually doing those rulings and we're super off base, I'm very sorry about slandering your good name.
Yes. Yeah, somebody put a lot of work into answering all of that stuff, but it's led to a lot of headaches for us now trying to interpret something from 20 years ago when we can't ask somebody for clarity on what they meant.
Right. So beginning with HOS, it was very important that we got some sort of proper system down for designing cards moving forward. Yeah.
And that we were answering, also thinking about the ramifications of every card and answering those questions before they came up. That's why there is an FAQ for HOS. That was definitely not questions that people asked us previously. I believe, at least it was HOS was the one that I actually just sat down one day and was like, I'm just going to type up a document. And then I spent like 4 hours typing it up or something. It was just everything I could think of about what weird rulings would be for that. So if you ever read the HOS FAQ, it's like different from the other ones because I was the one doing that. And then Sammy was the one that was doing the majority of the work for the other sets. Please don't ask me why I stopped doing FAQ.
Well, and so we also had to change it too, because when we uploaded the FAQs to Accio, which is our research website, we had to get rid of the questions and just put the answers. And so some of the answers were written in such a way that like it didn't make sense without the question. And then the FAQ on Accio sounded really strange. So we ended up just getting rid of the question piece to try to like make that process smoother for the person that was entering everything into Accio. So there was other background stuff happening there to just make it easier. But some of the other like wording changes we made was to start stressing like you may use an action to do this thing, and then if you do succeed at doing such a thing, you get to do this other thing based after it.
I want to talk a little bit more about that. That was like some different rulings on like, I think it was Sorting Hat had that ruling where you're using 2 actions to search your deck and not 2 actions to play the character from your deck. So that's why Lockhart's Hair Care Potion doesn't help Sorting Hat. Or like when you're using Eel Eyes and Beetle Eyes to take Bullseye from your deck and put it into play, you're not actually using the action to play a item. So Draco Malfoy Slytherin doesn't proc. So we wanted to be very clear about like, you are using the action to discard this item from play. You're not using the action to like deal the damage to your opponent.
Yes, and we've tried to continue that moving forward. Again, this was just an old wording and ruling thing that we tried to clean up. I think it's been successful for the most part, but there's still some weird stuff going on. But for the most part, I think it's cleaner than it was, which is good.
Yeah, for those familiar with Magic and the content creator sphere over there, this was a game that started out very much not reading the card explains the card.
Yes.
Sphere. Yeah.
Yes, very much so.
So that definitely direction we've headed now, starting back at HOS. Yeah.
Yes, we've redirected the course of the ship, and I think the wording is better and the rulings are a little easier now, which is a positive. We also started with Cornish Pixie, essentially adding a new zone into the game that we aren't actually calling a zone, and we're just saying you can put this card. It's an unnamed zone, but you can put a card under a card.
That zone,
the under the Pixie
I always
zone.
Pixie zone. Yeah, that'd be a good name for it. I play a lot of Arkham Horror LCG, and they recently named their zone that was previously unnamed into Limbo. So like cards, when you play them, they enter Limbo. So I personally refer to it as Limbo, but that's just me.
I think we'll have that coming in a future set or some sort of equivalent as a little bit of a spoiler, but we might have to wait for a certain book to come along for that one.
Yeah, but if we start referencing that, it'll be in the rules, but also I don't know if we start referencing that because that's a very strange zone to be in.
Yeah, we'll see. We also started defining what abilities means. And so we said lose all abilities. And we've tried and we've tried to use that verbiage moving forward and defining what that means. We created an updated rules book as well with this set. And the updated rules book kind of defines abilities. So that's a little more clear as well. And then the last big thing we did was we changed your opponent to an opponent with the idea that we would potentially one day have a multiplayer format. And we wanted these cards to not have to go back and change them again if we did get to this multiplayer situation. So an opponent just kind of encompasses, all right, you have 3 opponents, 4 opponents, whatever. You can now choose any of them, or any of them get to do this thing, etc. So that was kind of one of the last big wording changes that we made just to clean up future potential stuff.
And spoilers, we have been talking about a multiplayer format in Triwizard Tournament a little bit. I don't know if there's anything that's going to come of it as of right now, but it's something. And then also with your opponent to an opponent, there's a deliberate no change on adventure cards specifically, which still say your opponent. And that's because in my vision of a multiplayer HBTCG format, adventures are played on a specific person, but that might not change. That might change. Who knows? Very questionable.
Yeah, sending one person off on an adventure somewhere.
Exactly.
So we did a lot of the cleaning up of the text. Looking back, is there any lessons learned from the design space that you guys really took to heart around the formatting of the text and stuff?
Maybe not so much about the formatting of the text, but I think about like the general design philosophy, and especially like how strong should we be making these sets. I think the only one that like really stands out as like, okay, power level of this set is like where it should be, feels like GOF. HOS is notoriously like underpowered. A lot of the cards just are kind of unplayable, and that's not kind of a good place that I want a set to be. I think that there's definitely like cards that are played in tournaments right now. Drawing the Sword, Cornish Pixie, Central Knowledge Test, Baby Acromantula. People play these cards still, but it's not like those are the exceptions rather than the rule.
Yeah, I'd say pretty much the same thing, just the general power level of the set and the cards in the set. For me to argue a little less about restricting the power and just kind of letting it be there and letting the set just kind of breathe on its own as opposed to fighting that so much. But yeah, the general power level.
I'm going to hold you to that next time we have a conversation because it's still happening.
Well, it is, but as you just said, like Goblet of Fire is probably like at the right power level where it should be. And like that's been our biggest set. And yeah, there's some cards in there that I definitely argue to like reduce the power of. But I think for the most part, that was a lot less in terms of me pushing back on some cards and just letting that just be what it is. And as you said, looks like it's the strongest set so far. Looks like it. We'll see after this tournament, I guess. But
yeah,
for the full set, yeah, the experience with the design for Hogwarts: A History was definitely putting forward ideas that got knocked down a little bit.
Yes.
And I'm not going to point fingers, but we all know who's responsible for that one.
Yep.
Yeah.
So card design was a big aspect of it. But again, from an external point of view, when the set was first coming out, it was so amazing to see some of the art pieces coming through for some of the cards. What's the way that you sort of gathered that art the first time around?
This question is all Sammy.
Yeah. Art is definitely a journey to collect and go on. Very interesting pieces that are out there. Essentially, we wanted to have this be reminiscent of the original sets as much as possible. And we put a call out to the community. Anybody who wanted to draw, reach out to us, and you can draw for us. We'll give you the card names and the frame size it should be in, and then you can draw the piece as you see the art. And a lot of people who drew for us really just love Harry Potter and have always wanted to draw for the cards, and this was their opportunity to. And they really loved that and bought into it, which is fantastic. Many of them have come back for many sets, which is also really cool. So some of these pieces are originals for this game and for the revival set. And then a lot of it is just Googling and asking permission on various art platforms to use people's artwork. And we have some artists who have given us like their entire group of art that they've done. Mary Quiz is one of those people. Vlad Pantic is one of those people as well. And we're allowed to use all of their art with permission, which is fantastic. So art is quite a journey. We're always looking for new artists. So if people want to draw Harry Potter artwork for this, just reach out to us. Our email's in the description, and we are happy to have you draw for us as well.
People always always talk about, I think Vlad's art, who did Lockhart in the set, Wandering Nocturne, Dobby, Canceled Exams. Those are all like gorgeous, gorgeous pieces that we're super happy to have the permission to use. We brought up Basilisk Fang before. That art is like amazing. And I think Sophia is actually one of your best friends, Sammy.
Yes, yeah, back from childhood. She used to draw Harry Potter art for fun all the time.
Also, a lot of Sophia's stuff is original artwork for this game itself, right?
Yes, everything Sophia has done, everything Peter has done, it's all original artwork. And you can see, particularly in like Sophia's art style, you can see a lot of the original art style from like the early 2000s and late 90s. And it comes through very well in the tools she uses to draw and create it. And it just comes through very strongly. I will say I usually hear Vlad and Sophia as having the two, or being the two artists that most people are excited to see their new pieces because of the style of their artwork fitting so well with a lot of the original stuff.
Even going so far as to, I think Sophia was the Mandrake draft, and
Yes.
is what you guys used for the release image of the original set, which again it was beautiful and really from an external point of view drew everyone back into the game.
Oh yeah, and like back then, I do a lot of the marketing stuff now, kind of in making it. But there was somebody else who was choosing a lot of that, and just having one of her pieces be like the cover art essentially for this set was a really cool thing. Another artist that we got all of their permission for is Mary Quiz, which I've already mentioned, and she only had one card in this set, Arania Exume, but she gave us permission for all of the creatures she's ever drawn. And that is a huge number of pieces, which is fantastic. And we now use her art pretty much in every single set. You can find at least one, if not two or three creatures based on what she has drawn. And it's just beautiful art.
Plimpy, my beloved.
Yes, Plimpy is one of them.
Yeah, talking about the power level of GOF, Plimpy is also totally up there. Sometimes also with the art, we do have problems with, we had an idea for a card and we just can't find art for it. And sometimes, like a couple weeks before the release of the set, we'll just get a message from Sammy in the revival chat and it'll be like, guys, we need to change the name of one of these cards. I can't find art for it.
Yes.
And that's where it starts to get very fun and interesting. That's usually where I decide to like start trying to go on the art chase. I'm not too involved in the art, but a couple of the pieces are things that I found through like very deep Google searches.
Can be quite an adventure, that can.
You don't want to know some of the things that people draw for HP.
Some of it is quite something. And kind of what you just said, like the names do change based on art. We really try to avoid that because, as you said, we really try to fit the effects to the name of the card or the moment in the book, whatever. So when we come up with an adjacent name, we really try to get a name that is going to be either equivalent or refer to a same moment or something. So it's not too different from like the original intention. Sometimes it does just have to change entirely, and that's just kind of unfortunate. That is what it is. But for the most part, we try to remain as close as possible. And I'd say it's probably less than like 5 to 10 pieces per set that just art doesn't exist for, and we need to find.
No, it's only like 3 to 4, I think, per set, usually. It's a pretty low number. There's a lot of Harry Potter art out there, which makes
there is.
Me happy, I'm sure makes Sammy very, very happy.
Yes. We actually just have like a giant folder full of just art I have found, and I just dump art into there thinking we might use this in the future at some point. I'm going to make future Sammy happy by like having art already prepared for a set. And that helps a lot because it's just time consuming to find so much art. I do want to give 2 more shout outs to people that drew specifically for the set that I remember. And that is Paulo, who is still drawing for us and continues to draw for us. He made Moaning Myrtle for this set, and I believe he made a couple of the books for the set as well. And I also want to give a shout out to Drew and Jonathan, who also drew 2 pieces for the set and continue to draw for us in some capacity once in a while too. And then I mentioned Peter earlier, who also drew some original pieces for the set. So just shout out to all of those people. And the other artists that I may be missing right now, it was 5 years ago that we did this, so they're just kind of escaping my mind. But you guys all did great art, and we're very thankful that you have done this art. So I mentioned earlier that we were doing a lot of marketing for this set, and this was our first set really in the revival stuff. And everybody was really excited for it. It got good reception because it was new Harry Potter cards, but there were a lot of pieces that we had to kind of move in the background that kind of came out with the set as we were building building it and everything else. And I just want to kind of mention some of these things. We can talk about them if you guys want to more in depth. But the big thing is obviously some marketing stuff and release art, the Facebook cover art, the profile picture. A lot of that stuff was kind of built with this set as we released the first thing. We also started designing the tournament structure. So we had our first major online tournament for the revival sets with the release of this, I believe a couple of months later. And so designing that whole structure came with this. Yeah, we had like 29 people. It was a huge
it was a lot.
tournament.
And shout outs to that one owl deck that made it into top 8.
Right? It was an owl Quidditch deck, if I remember correctly. And I'm just so happy.
That was my like quarterfinals match, and I was like just so confused. But it was great.
It was so funny.
Obviously a good pilot.
Oh yeah,
definitely.
very good. We also had to create like a legal disclaimer and stuff like that. And we were building also the Accio website at the time. So it initially launched with this as a search database for everybody. So they could easily see all the cards in one place. They could search for the cards, etc. And Accio continues to grow in its new form. And we are building other things with it that we're super excited to launch in the next couple of months for all of you. So these are just kind of things that were being built as HOS was coming out, as we were designing it, that we were kind of juggling in the background as well. I don't know if you guys, women, I guess, because you were around at the time, remember anything that we kind of had to do. Obviously, like the release notes and the FAQ, which we do for every single set, that was also something we had to build from the ground up. Like, what do we want this to look like and stuff like that.
Back then, I feel like I was mostly involved with just the design aspect. Like even now, I feel like I'm mostly just designing cards rather than dealing with the back end because unfortunately my passion's not there. But and I can just shove it all onto Sammy, who does an amazing job organizing everything. Even like this podcast was his idea, and he's like, "Anyone want to do a podcast?" I'm like, "Yeah, okay, sure." I can talk about stuff. I can ramble on for hours about things I'm passionate about.
Yeah, but I think that HOS also kind of set up a lot of like who's going to be responsible for what things moving forward. So for example, like I find a lot of the art and I organize the two design teams and then the website people and just kind of like bring them together and make sure stuff is happening. But then there's other stuff where I'm like, I don't want to do this part or I don't want to have to think about it. And so you do all the flavor text.
Yeah.
That's great because I just don't want to have to do the research.
Flavor text committee that I am on. It's not just me. And then I guess I do the Lackey updates because Lackey is a very strange beast. It's also the platform that we use to do playtesting because it's very easy to just put in the card effects on there and then have them be cards with like just a generic proxy background. It looks kind of ugly, but it works. And unlike Untap, it is not shared to the entire world when you put them on there, which would be a little bad.
But yeah, so HOS really set up a lot of the structures that we're still using today. And with the inclusion of like Risk joining our team a year and a half ago or whatever it was, and he's starting to do a lot of the web design stuff too, which is great. So Accio is getting some more updates with him. And then the other people that we brought on to the web design team. So like HOS really set up the basis for a lot of what we're doing. And we're just refining those pieces. But like people are definitely like have the thing that they do. And it's been coming together quite well, which is good.
Yeah, that was a lot of stuff about HOS. But to wrap up like all of this stuff, I think we've talked for quite a bit on this. Just real quickly, off the top of your head, give me your favorite card from HOS and your least favorite card from HOS, starting with you, Reese.
Favorite card from HOS. Oh, it's hard. I very, very quickly at the beginning jumped on Dip It. I love the art for that one. Yeah. I'm not sure if we called up the artist for this one yet, but I love the art and I did love that static, continuous effect of either pushing towards a winning the game or getting some sort of card advantage. So I did love that. And I'd probably say that the card holds a soft spot for me. Least favorite. I don't know if I have a least favorite.
Or maybe like a card that you're not too keen on. It doesn't have to be your least favorite. I know that there's someone out there. Shout outs to Drew that keeps trying to make Armando Dip It work.
Yes. I wish we could do something. But as far as mechanics, I was not a big fan of the gotcha mechanic from Chamber of Secrets. So the Death Day Party one, not necessarily a big fan of that. But I think we're not done anything like that since from memory.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I
but
thought there was
Best Party
one
still good.
card. Isn't there one card from like
Is
EOTP
there?
or POA? Or I thought there was one. I could be wrong, but I thought we made one more.
I
But
don't
we
think
we
so.
tried to avoid it because we got some feedback that people are like, it's hard to do online when you're not necessarily on voice chat, and like it just adds layers of complication to it. And then we had to
Yeah,
make rulings for it, like how long do you give somebody to be able to say something, and how long do you have to
yeah,
like it caused ruling headaches too. I will
Yeah.
yeah.
say I initially pushed for Death Day Party to be like a ghost tribal card, and it got shot down, and I was very sad.
We just couldn't figure out an effect for it. Ghost
Yeah,
tribal
yeah,
card. Like, what does that even look like? I don't know.
it's just spooky.
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
mine, I think, though.
Yeah.
Sammy?
Very easily, my favorite card is Chamber of Secrets. I think that just shutting down recursion is a very underutilized and yeah, just an underused effect. I think that it should be played a lot more than it is, but it's not. And then my least favorite card from the set, Homan will not be happy, is
No, it's
Hogwarts
fine.
Pipes
That's
because
fine.
I think it just adds a difficult layer of complication to play, both online and in person, just to have to pick up your deck as opposed to just flip cards. And then the clicking with it, I just don't like that piece of it. But I think if
Uh,
there's a cool strategy one day that comes out, great. It just hasn't surfaced yet.
I think it's kind of usable in like divination decks that try to stack the top of your opponent's deck with that
Yeah,
one
divination.
GOF card that I can't remember the name of right now. Astronomy something, prediction something something. But it's very funny how you named literally the two potions locations.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, and so I noticed that with the original five sets, my top choice was to play Quidditch. And then when we started releasing cards, I've kind of shifted into like a Quidditch potion thing. And those are my
Hmm,
favorite colors now, not just Quidditch. So like that has changed for me as we release more cards, which is probably why Chamber is one of my favorite cards at this point.
that makes sense.
What are yours?
Oh, Jesus. You're asking me.
Yes, because you also have to answer this question.
Yeah, of course, of course. I think my favorite card from the set is probably Wandering Nocturne. I know that no one here loves adventures except for me. But I do actually think that this card is like one of the more balanced adventures that also feels very fair and it feels very flavorful as well. But those aren't kind of like the things that make adventures playable. You really need unfair adventures to be playable. So
Yeah.
it doesn't actually make it into most decks, which is pretty sad. And I think my least favorite, I should have actually said Eat Slugs as my favorite card, or like Old Sock. These are some
Yes.
like great cards. My least favorite card in the set, kind of want to say Swallowed Snitch. Not because of like
That's
the
ironic.
card itself is fine.
Not at a bad power level or anything like that.
No, no, it's a great power level. But everyone keeps reminding me that like I was wrong and Swallowed Snitch is actually a good card when I thought it was like going to suck. This comes up, you have no idea how many times this comes up in like R&D calls and all that stuff where I'm like, okay, this card's gonna suck, but we can keep it like this. And then someone inevitably brings up Swallowed Snitch. You were wrong about the power level of Swallowed Snitch. And I'm like, oh, please stop it. This was
Yep.
HOS. It was 5 years ago. But
Lessons
I
learned,
don't.
you know.
Yeah, and I don't let other things up. Like,
Oh God,
actually, I
here we
can't.
go.
Yeah, yeah, there's some real things. Like, you can just point to a card that's underpowered and be like, "I told you, Sammy."
Probably yes. I mean, I mentioned a lot of them on this call, so
Yeah. Shout outs to Circling the Goalposts and Kenny.
he's gonna be upset to
Oh
hear that.
boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a rough spot still. Years later, that's still a sore spot for him.
Yeah,
Feel so
that's
bad for
true.
him. Yeah. Do you guys have any other like final thoughts about Heir of Slytherin before we kind of wrap up? Also, shout out to I believe Stefan made the set symbol, and this was the first time
Mhm.
we had to make a set symbol, and now we have them for every set, obviously. So shout out to him for a lot of the graphic work, making the templates, making the set symbol, doing a lot of the initial marketing. He really helped lift a lot of the visuals of the set off the ground.
Yeah.
So a huge shout out to him for doing that and setting the
Um,
foundation for a lot of what we do now.
Yeah, he was also the one that made all the templates for the cards,
Yes.
put all the art and the text on the card together, making sure that all the text fit and like looked nice. Everything. Yeah, he's done a lot for Revival.
Yeah, so closing remarks, I think it's a bit of an inside joke, the R&D team, to bash on HOS a little bit whenever we do other design calls. But I think looking back, it really was a stepping stone to bring us to more
Yeah.
toward Goblet of Fire and HAH sort of power levels and design quality. So moving forward, hopefully, I think we're better off for it. And looking back, I don't think it's probably as bad as what we make it out to. I
Yeah,
think
not at
the
all.
team definitely focuses on the Eat Slugs of the world and not the pixies or the drawing the swords, which are actually quite good cards. So I don't think you guys need to bash yourselves as
Are you
harsh as you do. So
Are you saying that Eat Slugs is not like a great card? I think it's amazing. It is
I
intentionally bad.
yeah,
I think that the worst cards are the cards that are like unintentionally bad. But like we made Eight Slugs knowing that it would be completely unplayable. We made Hogwarts Pipes knowing it would be pretty completely unplayable.
yeah, okay.
I
So
will say,
it's not
Eat Slugs does have a spot though in like a plant deck. That's a free
It's
cantrip and some damage if you can
I
make
would
it's Jane
just
Cattell.
me.
no,
Jane Cattell.
just play Shrieking Shack. Oh, that's why this card exists. Shrieking Shack is actually good, unlike Eat Slugs. And it's in the right color. You don't have to deal with
Yeah.
Eat Slugs. Just play Shrieking Shack.
So any other closing thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I don't want to think about HOS anymore. God damn. Oh,
That's the closing line there.
yeah. Get me out of this hell.
All right. Well, thank everybody for tuning in as we chatted about HOS and kind of a lot of the design philosophies behind it. Hopefully, this gave everybody some insight into where we were at 5 years ago, launching the revival sets as a whole, kind of where we've come from that point. Next week, we are going to be chatting about the tournament and the results of the tournament, which two people here are playing on or in. So I'm super excited to hear their thoughts about that. In the meantime, make sure you follow everything in the link below and tune in next time. And thanks, everybody. We'll see you.
Peace.
Bye.